Good morning, everybody. It's Mike. Let's go ahead and jump into our call this morning. I just returned from the Century 21 Leadership Conference out in Palm Springs, and that was followed last week by our Top Agent Retreat. This made my 9th such conference this year. Now, after 32 years selling homes in Atlanta, you might wonder why I'm still going to this stuff. Why do I spend the time and the money? And the time by far is the hardest part. Why do I spend the time and the money to still go? Well, I got 3 reasons really. Number one, if you haven't noticed, the world keeps changing. I never banked on that, right? If you would have asked me 10 or 20 years ago, I would have said, hey, by 2019, I should have had it mostly figured out by then. I'll be on cruise control. Nope. What I didn't bank on was the world keeps changing at a pretty fast pace, right? So that's number one. Number two, for motivation and inspiration. I don't know, maybe you're different than I am. Maybe it just comes more naturally to you, but I just go through periods when my motivation and my inspiration just don't stay up. And I need a little reminder of what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And last week we heard from, at this conference, we heard from a gentleman called the Iron Cowboy. And I would encourage you to go online and listen to the Iron Cowboy. And his story is he completed 50 Ironman triathlons in 50 days in 50 different states. Now, you're probably a little bit like me. You go, why? And that's a whole separate conversation. But the will and the determination to do something like that to listen to his story was inspiring. Kind of got me a little fired up, right? Kind of got me eager to get back to work and to refocus and to be a little bit more determined and focused myself. So motivation and inspiration, I need that sometimes, periodically throughout the year. I watch so many people think that it just should come naturally to them. And when it doesn't, they think there's something wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with you. It just helps to have outside influences. And the third reason that I keep going to these is for that one good idea that I haven't thought of yet. What I find is that if I attend something here in Atlanta, it gets pretty watered down. It's pretty dry. It's pretty vanilla. There's not much edgy stuff going on there. And people aren't that willing to share. But when I travel, when I get outside my marketplace, I experience it myself. I hear it from you guys. I know this. People are very willing to share. Why? They're willing to share their one good idea with me because they want the one good idea I have that they haven't thought of yet. And I'm not a threat to them. So the whole dynamic changes. So for those 3 reasons, to keep up with new stuff, edgy stuff, new ideas, to help keep me motivated and inspired, and to seek out that one good idea that I haven't thought of yet. I've been to 9 this year. This is actually a low year for me. Last year I went to, I believe, 14. So, you hear me preach this, right? That when I go to this, I'm looking for one thing that I can come back and implement in my business. And if I can find one thing and I come back and I actually take action and I implement it, then the time and the money that it cost to go to that event was more than worth it. More than worth it. Well, this week I come back with 5 full pages of notes. Now, think about that for a second. After 3 decades selling homes in Atlanta, I can go to an industry event, a conference, whatever you want to call it, and I can still come back with 5 full pages of notes. I don't think I know it all, but I would have thought after 32 years, there's not much new under the sun. No. I just sat down and looked at it on the plane coming home and I was like, wow, 5 pages of notes. Now here's my challenge. I've got to find, in that 5 pages, I've got to find the one thing that I will implement, not today, or else it was just a waste of time last week. Well, Mike, don't you have more than one idea? I do, but all I have to do is make sure I implement one, and everything was worthwhile. What's going to be that one thing? I haven't decided yet, but the demand that I have on myself is I decide today. I don't go home today until I decide and I put it into action. I want to ask you a question this morning, though. So that's my story, right? This is where I've been for the past week. That's why I've been there. That's why I find it so important. That's why I keep urging you to do the same thing. But here's my question for you this morning. How do you invest in yourself? You hear how I do it, but how do you do it? How do you invest in yourself? Which I will contend for everybody listening to me right now, that it is the single biggest investment you can ever make. Investing in yourself. Are you driving a car that's less than 5 years old? Do you have the newest iPhone? Do you have the iPhone 10 with the 3 camera lenses? Yeah, I bet you do. Or I bet you're about to get it. Are you dumping money into lead generation? Because that's the new thing in our industry, right? These marketeers, these hucksters, they just take us for a bunch of fools. Yeah, they sell us internet buyer leads. How many of you are dumping money into that crap? Maybe you're on a team and you're dumping money into that. Maybe you bought into something like Relo and you're all these ways of buying your business. See, you're willing to invest in Zillow. You're willing to invest in your team leader. You're willing to invest in Cardis or some other relocation. You're willing to invest in all these other people except yourself. And that's what I'm here to preach to you about this morning, folks. Hey, screw them. Invest in you. It'll be the best investment you ever sell. Instead of all that phone, that other stuff, instead of the phone, instead of the car, instead of the leads, instead of the teams, instead of the Relo, instead of all that junk that surely by now you've realized just puts money in other people's pockets but not yours. Instead of that, why don't you invest in yourself? Like what, Mike? Like what are you talking about? How could I invest in myself? Well, not in a low interest rate savings account. Now, I do think that each of us needs at least 6 months of expenses in the bank, so to speak, right? I do believe that. But before you start buying stocks where you can't predict the rate of return, and haven't you figured out by now that it's like a fixed casino game? Instead of doing that, instead of playing fantasy football, instead of buying the new iPhone, instead of doing all that junk, why don't you invest in a ninja selling course put on by Larry Kendall? Why don't you do that? Why don't you get involved in a Tom Ferry event? Why don't you get involved in a John Cheplack event? Why don't you get involved in a Mike Ferry event? Why don't you get involved in a Brian Buffini event? Why don't you sit down and talk to me and let me help you identify your target audience and build a strategy for it? Why don't you do one of those things instead of giving all your money to somebody else? Why don't you? Because I'm begging you to this morning. Stop it. Buck the trend that all these hucksters have sold us in this industry and just start investing in yourself today and go out and make it happen for yourself today.